Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Novels and Nightcaps, the podcast where we read, drink, and ramble. My name is Gabe, joined as always by my co-host Noor, and today we are scamming some nobles and making mad money in the first book of Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastards series, The Lies of Locke Lamora. Originally published in 2006, this modern classic of heist fantasy follows Locke Lamora, the leader of the Gentleman Bastards, an elite group of thieves who scam the rich people of Camor. The setting takes heavy inspiration from medieval Venice, with winding rivers and powerful gangs with Italian-sounding names. And this is a book that I read originally a little bit over a year ago, and I absolutely loved it. So I reread parts of it for today, but I'm very excited to hear Noor's thoughts this evening. As always, we will give our spoiler-free thoughts on the book for the first few minutes before we dive into spoilers for the remainder of the episode. But before we get started, Noor, I am eager to find out what you are drinking today.
Good choice for good word choice.
Yeah, it's clever, like Scott
It's
Lynch.
clever.
Yeah,
It's like Scott Lynch. Today, I got myself a Negroni. It actually felt right this time around, and it's been a year since I made a Negroni. It's been a year since I bought the stuff for the Negroni, and today is the day that I finally finish all of those bottles. Throw them away, finally. But also, it just fit the vibe. You know, Negroni, it's an Italian drink. It has gin. And the whole time I was reading this book, I just kept thinking of the drink that I was going to get. And it just felt right. It felt that this drink should be gin-based. At least the Negroni that I made.
That makes a lot of sense. So I kind of went on a similar line. As our channel just hit a year worth of publishing podcasts every other week, I also wanted to do a bit of a callback because I feel like this was sort of a special thing for us to dedicate ourselves for an entire year to something that is really just honestly an excuse for us to drink, read books, and hang out with each other. And I made an espresso martini. So the difference with this espresso martini compared to last time, funnily enough, is last time, about a year ago, I used gin. But this time, I was going to do the proper thing and use vodka because this is what I have. So cheers. Here's my actual vodka-based espresso martini. And also I did it because espresso is Italian and that was my excuse. Also the dark color, it just felt right.
And you know what? That also fits what I did, because when I first made the Negroni, it was a mezcal Negroni, and it was absolutely horrible. But this time, I actually made a Negroni the way it was supposed to be made. At least, I think I did it right.
Yeah.
And it is slightly better than the mezcal Negroni. It's
You know,
tolerable.
I've yet to ever try a Negroni. I need to get on that. But I love espresso martinis. I have an espresso machine, and so and honestly, I also have a full bottle of Kahlua that I just won't use for anything else. I don't know what else I'm supposed to use it for besides espresso martinis. So it's always a treat whenever I get to make it. I didn't waste any coffee beans garnishing the top this time around. Instead, this might be a little sacrilegious. I put a little cinnamon on top because I thought it sounded nice, and it is nice. It's very warming to the soul, unlike this book. But I'm curious to hear, Noor, your initial impressions of The Lies of Locke Lamora. I read it. My general impressions are good book. What are you thinking?
I think it's a good book. I think it has fascinating characters, really quirky. It has a very distinct world, very unique, very lived in, and it is a lot of fun. It's a really fun book. And I think it's a great time. I'm glad I read it. I wish I had read it sooner. And I am going to be reading the next book in the series. So those are like my general impressions. This is a really fun book.
Yeah, I'll be honest. After I finished this, I was like content. I'm sure this series is great, but after finishing this, I was like, yeah, nice. I feel like I got it, but I would be glad to be proven wrong and continue the series and see where the story goes with our pals here. For those who don't know, I kind of gave a general idea of what the book is about at the beginning, and it is a heist fantasy. It's one of the first heist fantasies. This came out just before Mistborn, which we have also read on the channel, and everybody should check out if they haven't already. So this kind of is a true pioneer in the genre. especially in its setting and in its plot style. But I have some, not gripes, but some questions I'd like to pose that might challenge that idea of it necessarily being a heist novel later in the spoiler section. So stay tuned for that. But I also wanted to get your take on Scott Lynch's style, because that's something that is extremely distinctive, and I hear people rave about a lot. I definitely noticed it. It's present. All the characters feel like they're being written through Scott Lynch's point of view, if that makes sense. It's not as if, in my opinion, all of the characters are necessarily incredibly distinct in the way they sound. They're all quite clever, and they all have this sort of intelligence about them that is something that only Scott Lynch probably could actually do. Did you find that to be a distraction? Did you find it to be additive? And what was your just overall impression of that? Spoiler free at this moment. This is more so for people wanting to get into it. What should they expect, and what was your initial experience with the style?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think for me, it was something that I appreciated. I definitely was taking notes on this. I like the style. I do think there are many, many times where it kind of bogs down the story and it kind of slows it down. It like kind of trips on itself, if that makes sense. There were times where I would have to like slow down or reread the sentences, and then there were times where it just kind of flowed, flowed super smoothly and made for very fascinating scenes. And I like what you said about the characters being written through a way that only Scott Lynch could write. And you are right. All the characters feel like actual characters. Not like people necessarily, but they feel like characters in the story. And that is not a bad thing, I don't think. I think it actually works wonders for this type of story. The back blurb describes it as a sort of like a Charles Dickens story, and I can see that. I was like, yeah, you know what? From what I've read, from the very little Dickens that I've read, yeah, I could feel this style, this prose give a very classical, slightly whimsical take, and I am a sucker for that. But there were times where it definitely was a bit of a drawback, and I can see how this could be a turnoff for some readers. And as a matter of fact, I bought this book maybe 7 months ago. I was very excited to read it. I picked it up and I struggled with it for a moment. It took me a minute. There's a lot going on right away, and a lot of it is charming, but a lot of the prose and the style is very unique. You have to be in the right mindset, I think, for it. And so I put the book down and then I came back for it for, this episode. I was very excited to read it, determined to read it this time, and it paid off. I think it's a great time.
Your comment about charming, I think, really hits the nail on the head here. The Lies of Locke Lamora is an incredibly charming read. All the way through, it kind of makes you grin a little bit, for better and worse. In my opinion, for worse, because I think some of the emotional highs that could have been are somewhat flattened because of the style. But a consistent through line is I appreciated the style, even though I'm with you. I had to reread sections because the prose style jumbled some of the geometry of a scene at times and made it a little too complex. It got bogged down, as you said, tripped over itself. I completely agree. It's not clear. It's not like Brandon Sanderson. It's not a window in order to see the story through. But I would say on the whole, the style works for the book. On the whole, it also suffers from the typical fantasy thing where you have to get used to the diction of the world. You have to get used to the rules of the world. And that takes a while. That took for me a couple hundred pages before I really was understanding and with what was going on. It felt not as aggressive as some other fantasy reads with some more invasive worlds, but at the same time, that is something to always consider. But this is a very gritty, bloody, violent world. It's quite vulgar, and that's just something to keep in mind for anybody who's looking to pick up the book. But any other thoughts? Like, who is this book for? Who would enjoy this? Before we move on into a spoiler section where we actually get into the meat and potatoes of the story.
Who is this book for? I think, honestly, if you're a fantasy reader, this is one of those books that you should read. Maybe, you don't have to continue the series, but definitely at least check this one out. If anything, for its character and its charm, it's there, and I think it's worth checking out. If you like heist stories, even though, like you said, it's not necessarily a heist after a while, very much like Mistborn, it's advertised as a heist kind of fantasy story, but it's a little bit more than that. It's kind of like something else. If you like stories about adventurers and characters with like silver tongues and wit and charm, this is the story for you. If you like a good story about thieves with, questionable morals, this is also a story for you. And once again, I think if you like Dickens or any like fantasy style of adventure, if you like any sort of not necessarily heroes, but anti-hero characters, this is a story worth checking out. You're not gonna get a lot of like moral satisfaction from reading this, or like it's not gonna be that emotionally impactful, but it's gonna be a fun time. And I think, sometimes that is really all we need.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would also just add to that, I think what all you said is correct and true for this story. I also think that this might not be great if you're looking for an entrance into fantasy reading. To me, at least, this feels like something you would read after you are a little bit more well versed in the genre. Don't get me wrong. You read what you want to read. I don't care. Do whatever you want. But this is definitely a little heavier to me, at least. I felt like it drew pretty aggressively on the genre in ways that might be a little daunting for somebody who's just trying to step into the genre as a whole. There are probably better entrances to get a feeling for how magic works, because to be honest, magic plays kind of a minimal role here. However, it still very much carries some of the world building elements that those sorts of fantasies have. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree and say that, like, no, actually, this is like a perfect entrance to fantasy?
I don't think it's a perfect entrance, but I don't think it's as complicated as some of the other stories we've read. It's no The Way of Kings, it's no Stormlight, where like that is definitely not the entry point at all that you should be
That's
taking.
hard. Yeah. I guess that was
But
my entry point, really.
it was also my entry
Yeah.
point. So that was a daunting one. But yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of fantasy elements that, while they don't take the forefront, they are definitely part of the story. And if you can't get behind that, you are gonna have some trouble, getting used to the pacing, the story, the aesthetic of it all. So that can definitely hinder your experience reading this book. But I would say it's fair warning, it is a huge book. It's 600 pages, I think around 200,000 words. It's a hefty book. Again, it's no Stormlight Archives, but it's up there, and it's misleading. The book doesn't necessarily look as big as it is. When I picked it up, I was surprised by how big it actually was. I thought it'd be like 400 pages, and it ended up being 600 pages, and you do feel those 600 pages.
That's a really good way to say it. Yeah. I don't think the pacing is bad, but you do feel the 600 pages 100%. I don't, yeah. I would not say that the pacing is poor, but it is worthy to keep in mind. This does do a thing that we have expressed on this podcast that we don't like too much, but it does it. It has these parallel storylines that are in the past and then in the present, and they go back and forth between the kind of creation of the gentleman bastards, as an example, and Locke Lamora as a child, and then him as an adult. And that goes on for a while. And I'd be lying if I said that one didn't interest me more than the other. But we'll get to that here in a second in our spoiler section. So, any final words before we get into it?
No, I think we're good to go. I want to start talking about this story.
Yeah, I'm ready. I feel like we've been dancing around it a little bit. So, if you haven't read it yet, go read it. But to be honest, it's been out since 2006, so you've had ample time indeed. So, let's get
And
into
it's still
some spoiler
it's
discussion.
it's still going on. He's still working on the fourth book, I think.
Oh, is he still is he just a really
He's
slow writer?
he's been working on it for like 10 years, maybe more.
Of course he has. Of
So
course he has.
we'll see. We'll
Oh, is
see.
it coming out? Oh, I know he's writing other stuff too. Yeah, it's also good to keep in mind that this was his debut novel, which is quite frustrating, just as a whole, because it's so good. But this is his first book. This is Scott Lynch's very first book.
Pretty good.
All right. Well, what do we want to start with? We want to talk about characters. I think the characters, in my opinion, were one of the weaker elements of this novel. As you said, they felt like characters, and to me, they just kind of ran a little flat. Each character had their own little quirk, but at the same time, a lot of them felt very just they felt homogenous in a sense. I wasn't always interested in the distinction. Of course, besides our central two protagonists, I thought Locke was really witty, really charismatic. I enjoyed reading from his perspective. And then Jean was also good. Like you had this dynamic between them that I liked. But on the whole, I wasn't necessarily reading it for the characters. I didn't necessarily care too much. However, I would say that Locke getting beaten up a bunch definitely helped me care for him a lot more. Seeing him go through so much pain and like turmoil is really what made his character more interesting. And I was able to empathize a lot more with him. But all of the people they killed off in the group, I didn't really like. I remember reading this a year ago and being like, "Oh no, they died." Okay, but it just didn't. It didn't really seem to impact Locke that much, and it didn't really impact me that much. So that's the kind of gist. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was good. I thought Locke was good. I thought Jean was good. I thought the Great King was fascinating. There were a lot of good characters, and all the conversations were interesting. There was good banter. It's just something deeper than that was missing. And because friendship was at the core of the story, that seemed important. So I'd say it's good, not great.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we're back to agreeing with each other for the most part. I felt the exact same way about these characters. Locke Lamora was awesome, very likable, very charming. Jean was also great. I also didn't care for anyone else necessarily. I also didn't react that strongly when they died, when Callo, Galdo, and Bug died. And that was something that I noted as I was reading that scene. I was like, I'm not excited about the characters that I just spent 300 pages with dying off. So that was definitely something I noted. It's one of the drawbacks, problems with one of my gripes with this book is that the characters are a little one-dimensional. They fit certain stereotypes, which has its advantages at an early point. I just also wish they had developed them deeper than that as the story kept moving forward, especially if you're going to have interludes between every single chapter. You could have had more about these characters and what they mean to Locke Lamora, but we didn't get a lot of that. And as a result, the impact just wasn't there. And like you said, it also felt like it didn't impact Locke or Jean that much. They kind of mourned them for a page, and then after that, they just kept going. They were like, "Oh no, it's not your fault. You couldn't do anything. You were under control by this magician, and I can't fight. So our friends are dead, and we're gonna keep moving forward."
Yeah.
And so, that was a big problem with the book. I will agree with that. But on the other hand, I feel like this is one of the few books. Maybe it's because of the style, but I think it's one of the few books where the sort of one-dimensional stereotypical aspect of the characters is also one of its like strengths. It gives it a bit of charm. It really did feel like I was reading this older book. It didn't feel like a modern fantasy novel. It felt more like a classic story that, came out in the 1800s or whatever. Like a Dickens type of story. The way the characters talked to each other, the banter was there. They had their quirks, their personalities in the dialogue. But I will agree that, yeah, outside of that, they could have been developed a little bit deeper.
Yeah. The only, like, not saving grace, but the only thing that comes to mind that speaks to them mourning. I mean, there's this idea, of course, that these people are criminals. They are thieves. They understand that people die on the job and you have to keep moving forward. And when the job finishes, they do what they always do whenever somebody dies. I mean, they offer to the god of thieves the massive, Razo's fortune, the huge ship, right? That he convinces Thorn to, you know what I'm saying. I don't remember the plot details of it all, but I remember a ship is given with all the fortune, and that like sinks, and then that's the gift to the gods for the murdered friends, the penance essentially. That to me is interesting. That's an interesting element. I don't remember it being particularly deep or explored in any sort of way that was, interesting, but that could be interesting. The idea of that, of saying we pushed forward, we did what we had to do, we waited, we suppressed all of that emotion, and then we paid our dues, is kind of fascinating. And I wonder if that kind of washes the mourning away, that washes the grief away, the guilt away. Because let's be so for real, Locke causes all of this. This is all his fault. All of this is his fault. His friends all die because of him, and he pays their way, but I don't know. I think that that's something that could have been explored to a deeper level, that could have provided a really complicated emotional truth that might have even made this whole friendship and loyalty saving all, friendship and loyalty mattering more than riches, more than power, right? Friendship is the true strength. It would have complicated that in a fascinating way. I don't know. You read it more recently, so what is your take on that? Did you feel like that was explored to any serious depth, or was that kind of a, haha, got him, like we tricked the nobles once again, sort of thing?
I agree with you. I thought, it. I saw what he was going for. It wasn't developed nearly as deep as it probably should have been. It didn't hit. It definitely didn't hit. It was a bit satisfying in the way that it kind of clicked. Like, oh, they've been talking about these, like death offerings or whatever, and he does one for his friends, obviously, and it's the biggest one of all. It's the whole fortune, but it just wasn't as meaningful as I wish it could have been. I also feel like they didn't really go anywhere with the death rituals at first. Like, they briefly mentioned them, and we see that as sort of the thing that Chains hangs over Locke Lamora. Like, he has to make up the money for those rituals for the kids that he killed as a child. But we never see the end of that. We just keep moving forward, and we kind of forget about that. So it just wasn't developed nearly as well as I feel like it should have been. Then again, this is, Scott Lynch's first novel, so there's definitely, you can definitely see a lot of that. Not in the prose, kind of in the prose, but in some of those more underdeveloped features of the story. But
That being said, I don't know. I thought the plot was good. I thought the plot was really good. That to me was the driving force. I was never really sure what was going to happen next. And I mean, the reveal, especially whenever the Grey King kidnaps him and says, "You're going to be me." That's exciting. Like, what's going to happen? Something is fishy. Something is rotten about this whole situation, yet he doesn't have a choice. And then he goes, and then the reveal is like brutal. It's grotesque. It's the Kappa's like daughter, right? She's dead, and oh, it's horrible. It's the worst possible situation, and I think this is something that I really appreciated. A good book chooses the most interesting choice and then runs with it, and I feel like that's what Scott Lynch did almost every single time. He saw the possible avenues for where things could go, and he chose the most interesting option, something that I feel like most readers couldn't necessarily see coming for the most part for a lot of these things. I don't know. Did you figure that's exactly what happened with the Great King? Like the Kappa's daughter is murdered. I didn't see that coming the first time I read this, and it was pretty shocking. The brutality of it all, the grotesqueness. It seems like the worst possible situation he could be in for everyone involved, and him having to pretend not to try and not react to that is, yeah, that was a great scene. That was a great scene. Same thing with the whole scam as a whole and how that comes to fruition and really matures. Everything in the story feels like it matters, and it all has its own special sort of payoff. Whether or not the payoff actually functions, a lot of it hinges on the character's strength, and as we talked about, that doesn't necessarily always work. But the plot itself, I think, does work fundamentally. So I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I thought it was really good. I never my mouth never dropped to the floor sort of thing, but I really, really appreciated it. I'm trying to think of my complaints with it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? I'm trying to think, why did I give it an 8.5 out of 10? It doesn't feel like it deserves higher. It doesn't feel like it deserves higher, but it is really good.
Yeah, I gave the plot an 8 out of 10, just a little bit lower than you. It didn't wow me, like you said. It didn't like my jaw was never dropped. But I had a lot of fun, and I loved how things kept getting, overly complicated, in part because of Locke Lamora's theatrics and the way he does things. It reminds me a lot of how, I or how we play D&D, and we always pick the most unconventional, unnecessarily difficult path. It's usually me who does that. There's always this really clear path, and I take the most obnoxiously difficult path. So that was a lot of fun to see in the book. There's a lot of scenes that come to mind. The one where he has to acquire the clothes from the banker.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I loved how he did that. Or the one where they fake the illness so that he doesn't have to be at the war as himself, but rather as the Great King. And then he tries to sneak out of the building and ends up, intruding into some love affair. And then there's a big fight happening. All of that was fun. I love how complicated it was. I loved the fact that he plays the nobleman, Lucas Fairbright, and he also plays the Midnighter that's no, this guy is full of crap. That was awesome, because that is
It's a
so
good reveal.
unnecessary.
Yeah.
That's so unnecessary, but it's so funny. And like you said, everything that happens in this book is Locke's fault. But it doesn't happen in a way that makes you hate Locke. A lot of stories suffer from, I think, the main events unfolding because of the characters doing the thing. If the characters weren't in the story, if the characters took the logical route, none of the bad stuff would happen. And, sometimes that really works out. But a lot of times it kind of, makes the protagonist a very frustrating character to follow, I think. But here, I think it's done very well. Locke has a lot of flaws, and they get him into a lot of trouble. But one, he pays the price for it. He gets beaten up so many times in this book, to the point where you wonder if he's a masochist. And two, they are really funny. Every time I wasn't laughing out loud, but I was definitely smiling and thinking of, how clever this was and how quirky it all felt. As for the larger plot, I would say it didn't wow me, but it definitely, like you said, kept me on my toes. I didn't really know where it was going, except for the ending. The ending felt very natural to me.
Yeah.
And so, I saw the ending coming a mile away, and it didn't quite hit the way I thought it would hit. But
I can't decide if the flashbacks, the interludes, are the best part of the Lies of Locke Lamora, or the thing that hurts the pacing the most and really drag down the score. Because on one end, the Father Chains flashbacks build that family dynamic and explain why the Gentleman Bastards matter and build out the world in a very engaging sort of way, but it also fully disrupts the momentum of the present day. It disrupts the plot of the present day. So did the flashbacks make you more invested, or did they slow the book down in a way that really slowed the score, or dragged the score down?
I think the problem with the interludes, and it is something that I thought very heavily about, I think for me, the problem with the interludes is that they are not consistent. The first half or so are flashbacks, but then after that, it's like lore and information about the world. And I think this story would have benefited if Scott Lynch had picked a lane and gone one way or the other. I think if we had kept getting, flashbacks from Locke's childhood and, more from Chains throughout the book, I think that would have heavily impacted my score. It would have improved it even higher. I'm not always the biggest fan of flashbacks, as we've talked about before, but in this case, I felt like they worked, and they would have worked even more, especially with the whole theme of friendship and brotherhood. We didn't get a lot of scenes where the brothers bonded with each other, but where the characters actually interacted with each other after a while. Not in the flashbacks, anyway. Or conversely, if they had done the lore throughout, I feel like that would have been cool as well. But I would have gone with the flashbacks.
It took me a long time to get through The Lies of Locke Lamora. It took me quite a few tries to get into it, and then quite a few tries to get past the halfway point, and quite a few tries to finish it. And every single time, I got stuck on an interlude chapter. So for me, the interludes don't work. And it's not that they're bad, it's just that the present day is far more interesting. And it suffers from a similar problem with having multiple POV characters, where you usually have the character that you actually want to follow, and then you have to drag through the others until you get to like a climactic point for them, and then you want to follow them. And that's kind of the rhythm of it. Except for, I felt with the interlude chapters, there's never a point that I felt like there was a climactic moment that I really, really was engaged in. It makes sense at the very beginning. It makes sense to feel Locke Lamora's transition into the Gentleman Bastards, to see him be an orphan that has to be, essentially like sold into this organization because he's too much trouble, that whole thing. And he got somebody killed. Like, that is necessary and essential to the story. However, after that, it felt more like a lore dump and an explanation than it did add to the narrative in a significant, meaningful way. And that's not to say I didn't like Father Chains. I thought Father Chains was a very likable character, in the sense of, like, I enjoyed when he was on the page. He had interesting things to say, and he was both despicable and, somewhat nurturing, I guess. So I don't know. It was weird, but that detracted more than it added to me. And I wish you would have found a way to add more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff, to put it plainly. Yeah, I don't know if that's the gist of it. I appreciate it at times, but I can appreciate it but not like it. Like, it just wasn't, to me, it wasn't like taking my medicine. It wasn't like it was essential for the story, because the main plot's happening regardless, and the main plot is still interesting regardless, because the characters are not super relevant. The characters are not what's making me read. It's the plot. So I want to read the plot. And, that to me is the biggest problem. I thought it was extremely disruptive to the story overall. But that's not to say they're not bad, not good. There are moments that I like, absolutely. There are pieces of lore that I really like, absolutely. But that doesn't change the fact that every single time I hit the interludes, I was kind of disappointed and wanted to skip them. So, I don't know.
I do agree with you. I also think the beginning interludes were really long. I mean, we're talking like 20 to 30 pages each. They're essentially their own chapters. And then the second half or so of interludes are maybe like 1 or 2 pages. So once again, it comes back for me to consistency. I didn't know if I should treat the interludes as like excerpts, info dump, or actual chapters that I needed to get through. Because, like you, after a while, I was very tempted to just kind of skip through them. I love the idea. I love world building, and I love the idea of, reading all of this info and the lore behind the world. But not if it means, like slowing down the actual story. At the end of the day, we're here for the story, not the world. Everything else should serve the story, and it didn't always feel like it did. Sometimes it did, but not always.
maybe it should have been epigraphs, like especially in the second half of the book. If you would have condensed some of especially whenever it's just a page or too long, condensing that into a shorter passage that you can just stick on front of a chapter for those who are interested, I think might have been the better way to go about it. Because that way you're still able to communicate to the reader that you've thought about this world. It's big, expensive, and important, yet you're not taking away from the actual plot line that people care about. That's maybe what I would have done. But then again, who am I to talk? I I understand the purpose of flashbacks because you got to show how your characters got to the place that they're at. You got to show, or you think you have to show you got how your characters got to the place they're at. But at some point, I wonder if it's padding rather than actually like material. It's him seeing that I could make this book a lot beefier if I added all this stuff. So that's where I don't know. I don't know how essential a lot of it is.
And that's a very good observation because, like I said earlier, this feels like you do feel all 600 pages of the story, but it's such a small story once you actually think about it. Like, relatively speaking, the actual plot itself is very self-contained. And if you do take away all the interludes, this ends up being like a 400-page book, which is a lot more, appropriate, I would say. But yeah, I don't know. The interludes are going to be a hit or miss for a lot of people. I would argue a miss for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, we should probably get into impact a little bit here. We've kind of touched on it, just a tidge in that. I don't know. I think for me it didn't really hit too hard. Not to say the thing is though. Let me specify. I told everybody I liked this book after I finished it because I did. And I do. And I have definitely continued to think about it as a book that I very much enjoyed and a book that is very good and that I do want to recommend to people. But it's not like I really took anything away from it. I thought it was a good story. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Thought it was good, not great. Kind of like a few things in this. There are some things that excel and some things that don't. I never was particularly shocked. The moral of the story wasn't all that deep necessarily. You have a very flawed main character, which I appreciate. And he makes a lot of mistakes and he has to learn from his mistakes, which I appreciate. But at the end of the day, I mean, the moral is like friendship wins out, right? Like loyalty is stronger than money. Which is, yeah, but I don't know. It would have been nice to have something a bit more profound.
Yeah, not to like bash on a book that I actually did enjoy,
Yeah.
but I would go even further as to say that, there's not really a moral to this. It's just kind of, like obviously, his friends are dead, so he's gonna want to avenge them. But there's not really much more to it than that. Like there's no build up to it, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
That's a good point.
they are brothers, they definitely are there for each other, and I do appreciate that aspect. But it feels more of this happened, so naturally, the characters are gonna do this. I didn't feel like I learned anything, or I didn't feel like it even tried to. I don't think it was even trying to like even remotely say that, oh, friendship wins above all. Even though if you had to kind of grasp at straws for a theme, I think that would be it. But
It's about like
I'm not.
family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm not sure. It was a fun time. I love the quirkiness of the characters. I definitely took notes on some elements, but like you said, the impact wasn't quite there. I would recommend this book. I really would. For me, an impact of 7.5 warrants a recommendation, but it's not necessarily something to, go crazy about.
I mean, there is something to be said about like cleverness having its limits, I think, in that he constantly lies at every turn. That's his character. He's constantly making another lie, another performance. This is a classic trope that we see. And I think it's very enjoyable, to be very, very clear. And it's only whenever he actually tells the truth and lays it all out that anything actually happens and they actually listen to him, right? That at the end of the day, he runs out of lies. He runs out of personalities and falsities. He runs out of cleverness and he just has to lay it out on the table to the and basically say like, listen, there are some bombs and stuff. Like that is what happens in the end, which I do appreciate. I'm not going to pretend as if that doesn't matter, because I think that is cool, that is important, but it's something we've seen, of course. It's not exactly it's not exactly shocking, right? But he did intentionally make that choice to have him lie his way into all of his problems, and the only way out is via the truth. But again, that's not exactly profound.
Another element that I really appreciated was how ridiculous the truth was.
Yeah.
Like all these lies are so elaborate and complicated, and then he finally spills the truth, and it's just as ridiculous and just as absurd. And they're like, "Why should we believe you? This is even worse than the lies you've already told us." So I thought that was great. I loved it. I love that aspect of it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I do. It's one of my guilty pleasures. But I do love a character who is like very much kind of a jerk and unapologetically themselves. Someone who at the very end of the day, yeah, he saved all the noblemen and all the people in that tower, but he still managed to squeeze in one last lie and get away with all the money, even though he threw it all away for the ritual or the offering, which I thought was a good quality to out there. He's not just like stealing, but he's doing it for his friends. But I love that he was able to get in one last lie.
Yeah, I mean, the story is called "The Lies of Locke Lamora," so
it's
I
great.
did appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I also really did enjoy, impact-wise, while we're still on it, this whole thing about how Locke is this hit me, this impacted me. Locke is better at playing a noble than the nobles themselves. Like, he is, in rebelling against the class system and in screwing them over, he's better at pretending to be one of those people than the people actually born into it, which was incredibly fascinating for him to outmaneuver, outpolitic, outlie everybody. I don't know, like that was a fascinating element for him to, because on top of him scamming them, he's also not one of them. And I think that's important, because a nobleman can scam another nobleman, but there's something so much more, what is the word here? So much more satisfying about the fact that he's not one of them. The fact that he's able to know them so well that he's able to get every last detail correct. He's able to personify them in such a fascinating way. But yeah, the class element, I wasn't necessarily the strongest element of the story. To me, it wasn't played up too much, especially because, let's be so for real, Locke had lots and lots and lots of money. While technically he wasn't a noble, he was uber rich. He was not poor. He was pretending to be poor, and he was conning his boss, as well as the nobles, as well as everybody but his own family. And yet he's still kind of part of this class war, which I thought was fascinating, because he's kind of like not necessarily the same as the beggar on the street. That's not who he is. So he's not necessarily able to even claim that sort of position, but he's certainly not a noble. Did that stand out to you at all, that the class element of the story, or was that even not even like part of the analysis for you?
It was, but what's stuck with me the most, what I liked the most, I think, was that he was doing it for the love of the game.
Yeah,
He,
yeah,
he,
yeah.
they had
Very good
so
point.
much money. They could have done anything they wanted with the money. They were just doing it because they really liked doing it. And I appreciated that element. That was a lot of fun. But I will agree, the class element wasn't particularly exciting. It was very surface level. Like, you got the gist of it, and that's all you really needed to know. But it was not a detriment to the story, and it actually, I think, helped. And like you said, he's really good at playing people that are rich and noble, and he did it significantly better than they could have. And that is a testament to how, kind of being an observer of people and their kind of behaviors kind of pays off at the end. And I appreciated that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Before you move on to the world and style, we mentioned this a bit earlier about how this isn't exactly a heist novel. I mean, it starts off very Ocean's 11, we're scamming everybody, which is still even isn't like necessarily a heist. He's a con artist. These guys are all con artists. They're not like thieves per se, which it's okay. But that was definitely on my mind. I'm like, they're scammers. They're not breaking in and like stealing jewelry. No, they're big old scammers. They're great scammers. They're con artists. But it's not. I feel like calling it a heist fantasy is a little misleading. But then again, we talked about Mistborn isn't exactly a heist fantasy either. But it kind of starts off very Ocean's 11-esque, and then by the end is a much more of a revenge tragedy, essentially, right? Like it becomes this high octane adventure with this element of we have to avenge our fallen brother, which loses a lot of the heist elements. Not that that bothered me, but it is something that I just wanted to say because it seems relevant. Because I think that books are made of promises and payoffs, and I thought this was a heist novel, and it wasn't. I got something better. I got something I enjoyed probably more than a heist novel with Locke because, yeah, we got it. Locke is kind of competent. I mean, he's good at lying and performing and improvising and stuff, but all of his plans collapse. And well, I mean, he keeps losing. Like he lost around every. He feels like one of those hyper competent characters. Yet the proof on the page is only that he's made tons and tons of money in the past. But everything we see on the page, he's really good at improvising, but all of his plans always fall apart. He's not a good planner. He's not a good strategist, which I don't know. I thought that was kind of intriguing. I thought that was funny that he tricks us into thinking that Locke is really competent.
That is genuinely one of the best aspects of this book, I think, for me. It was a lot of fun seeing him just kind of mess everything up. Once again, I can't stress this enough. I really loved how overly complicated his plans were. Like, they were so needlessly complicated, so elaborate, so theatrical, and they all just kept backfiring on him, and yet somehow they still kind of worked. He's so, Locke Lamora is so not as clever as he thinks he is. He is, but it's more so that he's so stubborn that he gets things done because of that. Like he doesn't succeed because of his cleverness. He succeeds because of his stubbornness. And I think that's a good character trait. And I enjoy that. That made it a lot more fun than it otherwise would have been. Especially because at the end of the day, he is a very one-dimensional character. And he is very much a character. Like, he feels like a character, not a person. Which is at once a strength and one of the drawbacks of this novel, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so world. I referenced a little bit at the beginning. Obviously, this is based on kind of a medieval Italian Venice sort of vibe. It shows well. There's a lot of clear characteristics here that are interesting and fascinating. There's a lot of cool lingo. You feel the underground or the underground criminal organization vibe. It feels like there are the nobles, there's the law, there's the criminals that also kind of commingle at times, who's really in control, power. There's a lot going on. Yeah, at the same time, the world is quite small, at least in what we're gathered. The city of Camor is what we get. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was good. I liked it. I didn't think it was bad whatsoever. To me, I just didn't necessarily connect to it significantly. That's the core of it. I didn't necessarily connect. I got the visuals. The cover honestly did more for the world for me than a lot of stuff. Like the cover I think is fantastic. I think it's beautiful. And I was able to visualize a lot because of the cover. Some of the descriptions, some of the names, I think it was like, I don't know, Elder Glass Towers or something. I liked the festivals. I thought it was interesting. The wine choices. Actually, I'm not going to lie. I think those elements in particular are what drew me in the most. Having hyper special wines that cost a ridiculous amount of money, a fortune. That kind of stuff really built the world well for me. But a lot of the lingo didn't necessarily help at all. I thought it was Not that I thought it was unnecessary. It just didn't connect to me. It's 100% necessary. I just wasn't super drawn in. But what were your overall thoughts? I see that you have a slightly higher score than mine. You seem to really like it. What are your opinions here?
Yeah, I think as a standalone element, the world is awesome. I could picture it very well. It was, brimming with life, and I it felt very much lived in and like a real space. I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I agree with you. It's very self-contained. We don't get a lot of the world beyond Camor, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I also do agree that a lot of the things, we could have done without, at least at this point in the story.
You're completely right. I think I couldn't have said it any better. The Lies of Locke Lamora has amazing world building for atmosphere's sake, but it's weaker world building as like machinery for the plot, essentially. It's not driving the plot via the world as much as I would like, for especially for a fantasy novel where the world is so central. The only thing that I can really, really think of that you needed a fantasy world for was obviously the magic guy. Like you can't have the magic, in a regular world, but a lot of the other stuff you could have transposed that onto Earth. A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. But it was flavorful. It was flavorful. There was so much cool atmosphere, and you could really feel the vibe. It was very vibey. I liked the aesthetic a lot. It was extremely unique in its aesthetic. I don't think I've read anything like it. But at the same time, I I hesitate to give it any higher because of the fact that the world doesn't necessarily serve the plot, as we said. It's not as if the world was completely created for this character. That's at least how I felt. I think it's important
Exactly.
to work it around it. So
Yeah, here's how I see it. If this was made into a movie, most people would walk out of it not necessarily realizing this took place in a different world. There's a magic guy, and he does really cool magic stuff. That's about it, as far as world building is concerned, in terms of like pushing the story forward. Maybe this is something that plays a bigger role moving forward in the series. But from what I understand, the series is very much centered around Locke Lamora getting into trouble and finding his way out of it, and they're all very standalone. That's how I understand the franchise or the series. I could be wrong, but as far as the Lies of Locke Lamora itself is concerned, the world building is beautiful background, but like you said, it's not necessarily a strong, well-oiled machine that pushes the narrative forward. It's just kind of the backdrop.
but I do feel I was a little harsh on a 7 out of 10. To be fair, really thinking about it, the world was good. Like the world very much drove a lot of interest in the story, and I was wanting to learn more, and I do want to learn more, and I want to know about what else is happening here. Maybe just a little like tease here or there about the broader world as a whole. You have him impersonating Fairweather. What was his name?
Fair, right? Yeah.
Lucas Fairwright. And that you get a taste of another sort of altercation or the conflict going on somewhere else. I just would have liked, honestly, I also would have liked a better map. The map sucked. The map sucks. It was so lame. It was like, I mean, for those who haven't seen it, it's basically just a couple of lines on a piece of land. I'm like, you could have done cooler than that. Come on, Scott Lynch. You've sold how many millions of copies? You tell me you couldn't get a cool artist to make a cool map? Like, come on, man. That would honestly would have helped too. I love maps. But I do think I was a bit unfair. I really did like the world. When I was really thinking about it, sitting here hearing you talk, I was like, to be honest, when I was reading it, I wasn't sitting there criticizing the world. I enjoyed it. I did criticize the characters. I did criticize the impact, but the world wasn't actually at the top of my mind. I think upon reflection, it just didn't necessarily stick with me. And I didn't continue reading the story for a reason. And it wasn't that the plot wasn't good. Honestly, a good bit of it was like, I feel satisfied with the world I got here. That's it. I'm good. I felt like I got what he had to offer, and I don't necessarily need to know anymore. But I don't know. That's, again, during reading the world, was good. I liked it. So maybe I would bump it up a bit. Maybe 7 out of 10 is a little disingenuous, a little too harsh. I will 100% concede that.
Yeah, as an aspiring writer, I was taking notes on some elements, but as a reader, I was wowed by it. I liked it. I thought it was cool. I definitely felt the vibe. It felt real to me, but it didn't feel like it moved the narrative forward. But
I
still, I give it
you
a 8.5.
100%, and you're right. It felt lived in. It felt real. It felt like the stakes mattered for the people there. It felt like the characters, while most of the time as we described, they are characters and not people, they still existed within this space. It wasn't as if, I don't know, it felt believable. You're right. I 100% agree with that. It felt like a real world that people lived in, and it was well thought out. It was complicated and intricate beyond what I could fully comprehend, which is what it should be. The author should think about the world more than I, as the reader, have. I think that's a very common thing that should be the case, and doesn't feel like it always is. If your reader is sitting there saying, "What if this? What about this? Why haven't you thought about this?" Then you're in kind of a tough spot. But I never got that. This world felt way more complicated than I could have truly grasped, and I like that. I think that's a good thing. So take my 7 out of 10 with a grain of salt. It should be a little tinge bit higher. But moving on to style here, this is the one where I definitely gave it quite a high score. I give it a 9 out of 10. I thought for a debut novel, this was excellent. I mean, we haven't read a whole lot of prose that has been to this level. A whole lot. We had a bit or here or there that at least I thought was excellent, and you might have not, Piranesi. But but for this, I thought it was really good. It really tried. It felt like it had a distinct style, and he had, for the most part, a really firm grasp on that style, and it was charming. It added to the vibe of the world and the experience. It felt Italian and cocky. It felt clever, and I think that's the key here. It was clever, and the style reflected that cleverness, and without the style, it wouldn't have been clever. If it was, no offense to Brandon Sanderson, he just writes like a window, very clear, right? That's his intention. It's not necessarily always a bad thing. It's just really direct. If he wrote like Brandon Sanderson, the story wouldn't have been as good. So, with that being said, the style was extremely additive. I give it a 9 out of 10, even though it had a few points that I do felt like it was a drawback. That's why it doesn't get a 10.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also gave it a really high score. Not as high, but I gave it an 8.75 out of 10. I thought it was great. I also agree that it carries the story. It does a lot of the heavy lifting here. It helps enrich the world. It helps enrich the characters. It helps sort of make those 600 pages not feel more than 600 pages. It still feels like 600 pages, but there are books where it would feel even longer and not in a good way. And I think part of it is the snappy dialogue and, the banter and a lot of that, a lot of those elements that make the story very fun, a very enjoyable read. The only reason I didn't give it a 9 or higher is because of the info and the lore, the interludes, and a couple of the descriptions in some of the chapters that really kind of slow you down. They really want to make you appreciate the world, which I already do, and then it just keeps going. And sometimes I just wanted more action, more events happening rather than setting the scene. But the style, like you said, for a debut novel, it's excellent. It's awesome. And yeah, if Brandon Sanderson had written this story, or rather if Scott Lynch had the same prose as Sanderson, this book would be, either a 7 out of 10 or a little bit lower, I think.
You know,
It does a lot of the heavy lifting.
yeah, and like you did with the world, I was 100% taking notes stylistically on like How does he portray this expression? Because that's a really difficult thing when writing is you get into a rhythm, that sort of tick when trying to describe a specific emotion, whether it be his jaw clenched or like, oh, he shrugged his shoulders or ran a hand through his hair or scratched the back of his neck. There's just kind of very tropey ways, tropey is not the right word, cliche ways to describe how certain emotions are shown. Because obviously, if you're writing from a character's POV, you're not going to say, this other character was angry. You don't know they were angry. You're just looking at them. So, how do you show that sort of emotion? And he had quite a few moments in this book where the way that emotion was expressed might have been perhaps a bit wordy, but it was interesting. It was incredibly interesting, and I 100% took notes on that. Same thing with the snappy dialogue and the vulgarity of the dialogue. There were moments where they like insulted each other with such unique insults that I wanted to star and be like, "Wow, that's a fascinating way to to put someone down." I kind of like that. That's cool. Like you, I didn't really laugh a whole lot in the book, but I definitely smiled at a lot of the interactions between characters because it was so quippy, it was so snappy. It was like, The Social Network. What's the writer for the Social Network? What's his name?
Aaron Sarkins, I want to say, could be wrong.
I think you might be right on that. Yeah, Sorkin. Aaron
Sorkin,
Sorkin.
yeah, Aaron Sorkin.
It had that sort of quippiness, but if Aaron Sorkin wrote fantasy, that's kind of like a little bit of what I was getting, just how the rhythm of the pacing of the dialogue was really, really snap up. But that being said, I do agree with you. I didn't take the structure of the novel into account with style. Perhaps I should have. I didn't really necessarily take the whole interlude complaint or the like the interlude complaint into account here. Again, maybe I should have. If I did, it would probably be at the same score you had here. I more so shoved that into, I guess, dispersed across a few other areas. But yeah, I 100% agree. Stylistically, that was a poor decision to write it that way. And 100% agree. There were moments where setting the scene slowed everything down, or whenever they were describing something that happened or movement, I had to go back and reread it. And I'll be honest, when I was reading it, I thought that was just me being a little stupid. I was like, I'm just not intelligent enough to like really get this. I mean, it's the same thing when we were reading Crime and Punishment, where like I would read something, I'm like, do I know what happened? I should probably make sure I actually know what just happened. And like you said, it reads at times like a classic novel. It's a lot more literary than I think we are used to whenever it comes to fantasy. But there are 100% problems. So I'm with you. So we should probably give our. I don't think we gave our overall scores at the beginning of the episode like we sometimes do. I don't know. We're on and off with that. We just kind of let the vibe roll us down the path. Overall score wise, taking a combined character, plot, impact, world, and style, taking the average between those with each having their own special little weight. My overall score was a 7.9 out of 10 for Lies of Locke Lamora. Thought it was really good. I think in reality, probably rounding up here, it's more of an 8 out of 10 for me. Very much enjoyed it. I probably won't read it ever again, to be honest with you. 1.5 times was enough for me, and I'm good. So, what was your overall score whenever you take all of your stuff into account here?
Yeah, assuming I did the math right this time, I have an 8.25 out of 10. So just a little bit higher than you. There were some elements that I really appreciated out of this novel. I took a lot of notes, most of them mentally, but it was a fun time. I had a lot of fun. I kind of wish I had had more time reading this book. Part of it is the fact that, I'm reading this for a podcast. Part of it is that I wasn't disciplined enough and I kind of crammed it near the end there. But I don't see myself rereading this book. However, I do see myself reading the next one. I've heard good things about the second one, and I do sort of enjoy the character enough for me to want to keep reading more of his misadventures moving forward. It's the sort of character that I gravitate towards. So, I will be checking the next one out, but I'm not
From what
like
I've heard,
necessarily invested in it.
the brotherhood angle between Jean and Locke is the central focus of the second book. Like, it's their relationship in particular. And the character work is just a lot better in it. I've heard that the first one is still the best out of the series, but the second one is a lot more character driven, a lot more character heavy with those two in particular, because you have a smaller cast of characters to care about. That's what I've heard. So you'll have to tell me, unless we read it on this podcast, in which I will tell you as well. So I thought it was good. I very much enjoyed it. What was our subjective rating with our collage, our subjective collage? For those who don't know or are just tuning in for the first time, our subjective collage of books are essentially how we feel. More of a subjective sort of way to rate it. Our overall score is, I guess, however we would put it, a more objective way of rating it. However you can say that, with us having each category be weighted accordingly to what should weigh the most.
A more critical way of looking at it. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
because we're trying to be a little bit smarter here. We're trying to, we're usually not this negative. We don't think a lot about drawbacks and, things that we don't like. But if we were glazing every single thing we read the way we glaze every single movie we watch, this wouldn't really be a
huge
podcast.
Problem. That's a thing on Book Talk. We've talked about this a tiny bit. I'm going on a rant. This rant time. Screw the subjective scale. We're getting on it. So one thing that Book Talk has really done is just made everybody glaze all of the books. Every book is a 10 out of 10 now. And I know you definitely have felt the ramifications of that with something like Red Rising, which you didn't necessarily connect to.
Yeah.
That worked for me a lot. I really did connect to that. But I haven't connected to every Book Talk book. But like, neither of us liked A Court of Thorns and Roses. Not that we're the target audience for that, but still, that's a Book Talk book that they pressed really hard, and it just wasn't it for me. But in general, on social media, every book that they post about is like 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. These are the 5 books you should read if you want to bust your reading slump. All that to say, we try to be a bit critical here, not because we hate books, but because we love books and we want you to understand what books we actually connect to the most. And that being said, subjective collage, this is just what we vibe. Would we rate it as an ebook, a paperback, a collector's edition, a hardcover, an ebook, an audiobook? Just nothing is greater than the other, except for probably ebook is the lowest. But beyond that, it's really just what we feel is right for this. And we both agreed on this. I said paperback. I think that this is perfect. This would be weird as a hardcover. I can't explain why. It just makes sense as a paperback. This, especially the big, I think I've like the trade one, the big one. I don't know, whatever. This makes sense. I want it to be a little floppier. I want to be able to flip through the pages quickly. I want to be able to beat it up a little bit, just like Locke is constantly beat up. That's my full intention. And I want to be able to throw it around and not feel too bad. And I see you also said paperback, so let's get into it. Paperback. Why is that?
Yeah, I think we are in agreement. It reads like classic literature, but it's not a classic. It's a paperback type of story. It's something that, like you said, I want to, kind of flip and fold and have it kind of laying around without having to worry too much about it. It's something that I don't necessarily see as a hardcover. And also, like, while there were elements that I really enjoyed and while I did have a great time reading the story, it's not necessarily one of the better stories out there. Not in its genre and not necessarily in its like style, I would say. But it's a fun time. I had a lot of fun. Definitely enough fun for me to keep reading, but not necessarily for me to, glaze the book the way a lot of people do in, contemporary, like book talk, really. Like you said, everybody glazes the next big book, and then we end up being disappointed by it. But, I had a great time.
100%. 100%. So, with that being said, last time on Novels and Nightcaps, we read Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Our next mini episode is going to be reacting to the movie Supergirl, which is adapted, of course, from the comic book. But after that, Nor, do you have the book ready? If you don't, I do.
Yeah, I will say, I'm pretty sure we're going to be releasing this episode after the Supergirl one. But
Whatever.
it doesn't
That
matter
makes sense.
because after this episode, we're going to be reading The Odyssey. The Odyssey.
The Odyssey by Homer. It's in
And
obviously in anticipation for the movie, the Christopher Nolan
which
movie,
we're also going to
which
be
is
talking about.
naturally so. Okay, because we're seeing that together. For those of you who
Yes!
don't know, we live in different states right now, and we're going to be unified for the Odyssey, which is going to be so very exciting. I'm really anticipating it. I think we've both read the Odyssey before, right? Is this like a
Yes.
high school read for you as well?
Yeah, this was a freshman read for me. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. So I'm looking forward to rereading it with fresh adult eyes and seeing if I glean anything more or if it's just as stale as last time. I don't think it will be. I think the last time I was forced to read it and that made me not like it. And so I'm really anticipating this. So if you're excited for the movie too, go ahead and read along and join us for the next episode of Novels and Nightcaps. Nor, did you finish your drink? Did you finish your
As
Negroni this time?
always.
You did? Well, I also finished my drink because here at Novels and Nightcaps, we finish our drinks. Everybody have a good night.